The first time I saw the house next door, I didn't think much of it. It wasn't abandoned. Not exactly. It just looked neglected, as if someone lived there but didn't care who noticed. Paint peeling, yard overgrown, windows always dark even during the day. I moved into my new place in upstate New York at the end of September, just as the leaves were turning. It was supposed to be a fresh start after a messy breakup and a stressful job, and the quiet suburban neighborhood felt like the perfect escape. Then the lights in the house next door came on. It was my first night in the new home. I was unpacking dishes when I caught movement from the window above the sink. The house next door, which had been dark all day, suddenly lit up in a dull yellow glow. At first, I thought someone had moved in recently, like I had. Then I saw him. A man stood in the upstairs window, just barely visible through the curtain. The light behind him cast his silhouette sharply. He didn't move, didn't shift, didn't turn. He just stood there, staring at something I couldn't see. His posture was rigid, almost unnatural. I told myself he was just looking out the window, but something about the way he held his head tilted slightly forward as if listening instead of looking made me uneasy. I tried to ignore it. Everyone has their quirks, new neighbors, new oddities. For the first week, everything seemed fine. I settled into my job, arranged my furniture, met a few friendly neighbors while walking my dog, Daisy. But every night, without fail, the man in the house next door appeared in the upstairs window. Sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for hours. Always still, always watching nothing. By the second week, I started noticing more. It was maybe 10 at night on a Thursday when I heard the fence rattle. Daisy's ears perked up immediately, and she let out a low, anxious whine. I walked to the back door and flipped on the porch light. The wind was barely moving, so it wasn't weather. Then I saw it, a shadow near the fence. Someone was on the other side, crouched low. I couldn't see their face, only a figure hunched like an animal, fingers curled around the slats of wood. "Hello?" I called, voice trembling more than I wanted. Silence. The figure slowly rose until it reached full height. Then its head turned, not toward the house, but toward my porch light. The moment the light fully illuminated the silhouette, it stepped back into darkness. I backed up and locked the door immediately. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it was just some teenager messing around. The neighborhood wasn't dangerous. It wasn't the kind of place where people skulked in the shadows. But Daisy refused to go near the fence for days, always pulling me toward the opposite side of the yard. I noticed the man next door more frequently after that. He didn't just appear at night. Sometimes I'd see him in the early morning, standing on his porch without a coat, staring straight ahead. Sometimes he'd be in the yard, motionless, hands at his sides. Once I caught him on his knees in the dirt, head bowed like he was praying. He never reacted when he noticed me. Never waved, never spoke, just watched. By the end of October, I began hearing things through my bedroom wall. My bedroom faced his house, and late at night I'd hear faint clicking sounds. Tap, 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 tap. Sometimes it was rhythmic. Other times irregular, like someone tapping their nails on wood or snapping a small object repeatedly. One night, it went on for nearly 3 hours. I called the non-emergency police line once, right after midnight. They sent a patrol car. The officer knocked on the man's door for a long time, but no one answered. After a few minutes, the officer shrugged, said it was probably harmless, and left. But it didn't feel harmless. I finally asked a neighbor about him. Mrs. Patterson, an older woman who had lived on the street for nearly 40 years, went pale when I mentioned the house. "You mean the Harrington place?" she whispered. I guess, the man who lives there." Her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted her glasses. "No one lives there, dear." A chill spread through me. "What do you mean? I've seen him. Almost every night." She leaned closer, voice dropping. "The Harringtons moved out 6 years ago after a tragedy. The house has been empty ever since. No one ever bought it. No one stays in it for more than a night or two. But people have always said," she paused, "people have always said they've seen someone inside." I laughed nervously. "You're telling me the house is haunted?" She didn't laugh. "I'm telling you something isn't right with that place. And you should stay away from the windows at night." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about what she said. Empty for 6 years? That didn't make sense. I had seen lights on, heard sounds, watched someone move in the yard. I wasn't imagining that. Around 2 in the morning, Daisy began growling at the bedroom door. I sat up, heart racing. Her growl deepened, more intense than I'd ever heard from her. I tried to calm her, but she just stared at the window with her body rigid. Then I heard it. Tap, 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 tap. Not from the wall, from the window. Slowly, I turned my head. The blinds were closed, but I could see the faintest silhouette behind them. Someone was standing on the other side. I froze. Daisy barked furiously, but I couldn't move. Tap, 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 tap. This time it was louder, more insistent. I forced myself to stand. My legs felt numb. I grabbed the edge of the blinds and yanked them open. Nothing. No one was there. But the glass had smudges on it. Fingerprints. Long, thin fingerprints that trailed downward as if someone had pressed their entire hand against the window and dragged it slowly. That was the night I decided to buy cameras. I installed them the next morning, one by the front door, one in the backyard, one pointing directly at the house next door. I checked them constantly, always half expecting to see that man standing inches away. But for 3 days, nothing happened. No movement in the yard, no tapping, no figure in the window next door. I started sleeping again. Daisy relaxed. I let myself believe it was over. Then I checked the backyard camera on the 4th morning. My stomach dropped. There he was. From 3:14 to 3:23 a.m., the figure stood completely still at my fence, not moving, not shifting, just staring directly into the camera. The footage was grainy in the darkness, but his face, something was wrong with his face. It was blurred in a way that didn't seem like bad quality, more like motion, except he wasn't moving at all. The edges of his head seemed too sharp, his neck too long, his posture too straight. At 3:23, he stepped back and vanished. That evening, I decided I needed to know the truth. I marched to the house next door and tried the front door. It swung open. The smell hit me first. Stale, old, like dust and mildew mixed with something rotten underneath. The air inside was cold, colder than outside. I stepped in slowly, calling out, but the house answered with silence. Everything inside was covered in sheets, as if no one had lived there for years. Cobwebs stretched across the corners. The floors creaked under my weight. I walked through the living room, dining room, kitchen. Nothing. No signs of anyone living there recently. Then I went upstairs. The room with the window, the one he always stood in, was at the end of the hall. My heart pounded as I pushed the door open. The room was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no curtains, no footprints in the dust except mine. But on the floor in the center of the room was a small, old-fashioned tape recorder. I crouched and pressed play. The tapping sound filled the room instantly. Tap, 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 tap. Then a low whisper, distorted by age and static, slipped through the speaker. I know you're watching me. I dropped the recorder and backed out of the room. My hands were shaking uncontrollably. I turned and ran down the stairs, bolting out the door and into my house. I didn't sleep at all. When morning came, I checked the backyard camera again. This time, the footage made my blood run cold. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the camera showed me, standing at the fence. Not the man. Me. Same clothes I had worn to bed, same hair, same posture. Except I wasn't moving. I was just staring into the camera, expression blank. Daisy began barking wildly behind me. I jumped and turned around, expecting to see someone at the window. Nothing. But I knew what I had seen. I watched the footage again and again. The figure wasn't an imitation or a glitch. It was me, down to the smallest detail. Except the eyes. The eyes were wrong. Too dark. Too empty. When I checked the camera from the side yard, the same figure, my figure, walked toward the house next door at 3:23 a.m. It stopped at the neighbor's window and just stood there for the remainder of the footage. I never sleep through the night anymore. I move through each day exhausted, unable to shake the feeling that something is still watching. Something that learned how to look like me. Something that stood in that house for hours, copying my movements, studying me the way a predator studies prey. Sometimes, late at night, I hear tapping again. But now it comes from inside my own walls. Story the end. It started the day my neighbors moved in across the street. I was used to quiet, the kind of suburban silence where the loudest noise is a lawnmower on Saturday morning. But the new tenants, an older couple, Mr. and Mrs. Holloway, brought something different. Their moving truck arrived late in the afternoon, and they worked silently, almost too silently, carrying boxes into their house with deliberate precision. The first night, I noticed lights flickering in their windows, but only briefly, as if someone were watching the bulbs rather than just living in the house. I dismissed it as an electrical issue, the kind older homes sometimes had. But then the dogs started barking. My neighbors don't have pets, so it struck me as odd. The barking wasn't constant, just sudden, sharp yelps, like an alarm triggered without warning. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of scraping against the wall. At first, I thought it was the wind, or maybe tree branches brushing the siding. But the noise was rhythmic, deliberate, moving along the length of their house and stopping abruptly. When I peered through my blinds, I saw nothing, though the shadows in their windows seemed wrong. Then came the disappearances. I noticed it first with the mail carrier. She stopped coming down my street for a week. Then a neighbor 2 houses down mentioned that their cat had gone missing around the same time the Halloways moved in. Nothing was said, but it was strange seeing how fast animals were vanishing in the neighborhood. I decided to confront them. One morning, I walked over while the sun was bright, hoping to catch them in a friendly conversation rather than an ominous midnight visit. Mr. Halloway answered the door, his face pale and expressionless. "Hi, I'm your neighbor," I said. "I just wanted to welcome you. I also wanted to ask about the noises. We've heard some unusual sounds." He smiled, a tight, controlled smile. "Oh, don't worry. Old house, very old pipes. They talk sometimes." I tried to laugh it off, but the way he said talk made me shiver. Mrs. Halloway appeared behind him briefly, her eyes hollow, dark shadows beneath them, and said nothing. They didn't invite me in, didn't answer further questions, and shut the door before I could press. After that, things escalated quickly. Late at night, I would hear footsteps on their roof, slow, heavy, deliberate. Sometimes the sound would be inside my attic, though I live alone and never heard anything like it before. One evening, while walking my dog, I noticed a strange pattern in their front yard. Hundreds of small holes, dug meticulously in straight lines, almost like they were planting something, or searching for something. I started keeping notes, taking photos, documenting every strange occurrence. One night, I even recorded audio. Whispers in the dark, low and guttural, like multiple voices speaking just beneath comprehension. The recording ended with a sudden shriek that made me drop my phone. I tried to warn neighbors, but no one believed me. People are stubbornly blind when they want to be, dismissing me as paranoid. I began installing security cameras, motion sensors, and even a few hidden microphones in my yard. The footage was unsettling. At times I could see shadows moving along their walls, shapes that shouldn't exist. On several nights, the cameras picked up figures standing perfectly still in the middle of their lawn. No eyes, no discernible face, just the shape of a human form staring at my house. Then, one night, the unimaginable happened. I was awakened by pounding at my front door, frantic and desperate. When I opened it, no one was there, just a small, bloodied animal, a raccoon I recognized from the neighborhood, left as a warning. I ran to my window and saw them standing in their doorway, illuminated by a single flickering light. They weren't smiling, they were watching, waiting. A week later, the disappearances reached a terrifying peak. My neighbor's teenage son went missing. My neighbor, a friend of mine, called me frantic, saying she last saw him riding his bike past the Halloway house. The police investigated, but found nothing. The Halloways claimed ignorance, but their expressions, calm and almost bored, made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't sleep. I stopped leaving my house unless necessary. Every creak in the floor, every shadow, every whisper of the wind seemed amplified. I began hearing the scratching under my own floorboards, soft at first, then louder, closer, as if something was moving beneath me, pacing, waiting. Then, one night, I saw it. From my bedroom window, across the street, the front door of their house opened. Mr. and Mrs. Halloway stepped out, carrying something long and wrapped in a dark cloth. They laid it in the middle of their lawn and stepped back. Slowly, carefully, they unfolded it. I couldn't see clearly from my distance, but it moved. It twisted unnaturally, like it was alive. And then I heard the low, guttural whispers again, and I knew. It wasn't human. I called the police immediately. They came, but by the time they arrived, the Halloways' house was empty. No lights, no movement, no trace of the things I had seen. The dark shape in the yard was gone. They didn't take the report seriously. They dismissed my calls as baseless, paranoid complaints. I sold my house soon after. I left in the middle of the night, quietly, hoping they wouldn't follow. I don't know if they did. I don't know where they went. But wherever they are, I know they're still doing whatever it was they were doing, watching, waiting, and taking what they want. Even now, I get the occasional call or email from someone who bought a house on the street. They tell me the same story: the scratching, the laughter, the disappearances, the shadows. And every time I hear it, I remember the Halloways. And I realize some neighbors aren't just people you live beside, they're monsters hiding in plain sight, perfectly normal during the day, terrifying at night. I don't ever plan to go back. And I warn anyone who moves anywhere new to pay attention. Look closely. Watch the neighbors. Some of them are not who they seem. And once you notice, it may already be too late. Story the end. The day the Marshalls moved in next door, the neighborhood felt excited in that small suburban way. It was late spring in Northern Virginia, the air warm and thick with the scent of cut grass, and people waved from their driveways as a moving truck backed into the house beside ours. My husband Eric joked that maybe we'd finally get neighbors who wouldn't complain about the Halloween decorations we put up every year. He had no idea how wrong he was. At first, the Marshalls seemed perfectly normal. A married couple, Thomas and Linda, and their adult son, Noah, who looked to be in his mid-20s. He was tall, rail-thin, always wearing a hoodie even in the heat. He barely spoke when I introduced myself, just nodded and stared down at his shoes. Thomas and Linda did all the talking, overly friendly and cheerful in a way that felt rehearsed, like they were trying too hard. Still, nothing seemed dangerous at the time. Just odd. The first strange incident happened about a week after they moved in. I stepped outside one morning to get the mail and found our recycling bin moved from beside the garage to the middle of our yard. Bottles and cardboard were scattered everywhere. I assumed raccoons until I noticed the footprints. Shoe prints much too large to belong to any child, leading from our driveway straight toward the Marshall's side yard. I mentioned it casually to Eric, who shrugged it off. He'd always been the level-headed one between us, the one who didn't jump to conclusions. I tried not to think much of it. Then I started seeing Noah late at night. Our bedroom window faces their house. One night, I woke around 2 a.m. to get a glass of water and saw him standing near the property line, facing our house. Just standing. No phone, no flashlight, nothing. His posture rigid, his head tilted almost bird-like. I froze, watching him for a full minute, expecting him to move or turn away. He didn't. The next morning, I tried to laugh it off. Maybe he was smoking, maybe he liked fresh air. There had to be a normal explanation. But deep down, something about his stillness unnerved me. The second time it happened, he was closer, much closer. Standing near our basement window, staring at the ground. When our porch light flicked on automatically, he darted back to the shadows behind their fence. That time, I woke Eric and made him look. He didn't see anything, but he believed me enough to install motion sensor lights around the house. That only seemed to make Noah more interested. Within a week, we started finding things in our yard that didn't belong to us. A pair of rusted pliers, an old pocket knife, a cracked ceramic doll head, a man's work glove. Placed, not dropped, arranged neatly near our back steps like little offerings. We brought them inside, unsure what to do with them, unsure if confronting the Marshalls would escalate things. One morning, our dog, Daisy, refused to go outside. She stood at the threshold, growling low in her chest, a sound I had heard maybe twice in her life. When I stepped onto the back deck to see what she was reacting to, I found a small mound of freshly turned soil, about the size of a loaf of bread. Buried in it was a single Polaroid picture of our house, taken at night. The angle of the shot suggested our yard, our deck, maybe even the bottom of our steps. Eric wanted to knock on their door right away. I stopped him, not out of fear of being rude, but out of a deeper fear I couldn't articulate. Something about the Marshalls, something about Noah specifically, made my instincts go cold. Instead, we called the police. The officers were polite but unconcerned. The photo, they said, was creepy but not illegal. The items in the yard? Probably a prank. They told us to keep our doors locked and call again if anything escalated. Escalated. I didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, around 4 a.m., I woke to scratching. Soft but deliberate. Not mice. Not tree branches. Something sharper. Something trying to get in. Eric was still asleep. I slipped quietly out of bed and moved toward the sound. It was coming from the side of the house near the dining room. I peeked through the blinds. A face stared back. Noah, his nose almost pressed to the glass, eyes wide open, pupils huge. His expression was blank, not angry, not curious, just empty. As if he wasn't seeing my house at all, but something behind it. Something only he could see. I gasped and stumbled backward. The motion triggered the outside floodlights, and he bolted, sprinting across the yard so fast he looked like a blur of shadow. This time the police didn't bother coming out. They told us on the phone that unless he broke in, there wasn't much they could do. We barely slept that night. The next day I told Eric I wanted cameras. Lots of them. We bought 6. 2 for the front, 2 for the back, 2 facing the marshal's property line. That evening, while Eric was installing them, Thomas came outside and walked right up to him. I watched from the kitchen window. Beautiful evening, said with a smile too wide, teeth too straight for his age. Hope the new setup helps you feel safe. Eric, trying to stay polite, replied, "It's just for peace of mind." Thomas leaned in slightly. "Everyone deserves peace of mind after what happened at our old place, but I'm sure you knew that." Eric didn't respond. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. After what happened at our old place. That night, I searched their previous address. The results made my stomach twist. 3 years earlier, a neighbor reported seeing Noah digging holes at 3 a.m., burying things, unburying others. Police dismissed it as eccentric behavior. Weeks later, a missing cat was found in one of the holes. No charges were filed. Lack of evidence, according to the articles. The marshals moved shortly after, and now they were here. The footage from our cameras began capturing things immediately. The first clip showed Noah pacing along the property line, muttering to himself. The audio was too fuzzy to make out words, but his voice was rhythmic, almost chanting. Another clip showed him holding something small in his hands, rocking it back and forth. When he turned his back, we paused the video and zoomed in. It was Daisy's collar. Daisy, who hadn't come inside when we called her the previous afternoon, we spent hours searching the yard, shaking a bag of her treats, calling her name. Nothing. By midnight, I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. Daisy wasn't just a pet. She was family. And then the worst clip appeared the next morning. Noah standing on our back deck. At 3:17 a.m., just standing, not trying to break in, not snooping, just facing the door. Still, unmoving, watching. He stood there for almost 7 minutes. Then he walked away. Eric wanted to confront them again. I said no. Absolutely not. Something about Noah felt unpredictable, dangerous in a way you couldn't reason with. That evening, around sunset, Linda came to our door. She held a casserole dish, smiling kindly. "We noticed your dog's been missing," she said softly. "Noah's very upset. He loves animals. If he sees her, I promise we'll bring her right back." I stared at her. She blinked at me calmly. Too calmly. I didn't take the casserole. That night the scratching returned. But this time it wasn't at a window. It was at our bedroom door. Inside the house. I woke up instantly. Eric did too. We both stared at the door, frozen. The scratching was slow, dragging, like someone running their fingernails along wood. I couldn't breathe. Eric grabbed the bat we kept under the bed, and with a trembling hand, he flung the door open. Hallway. Empty. Silence. We checked every lock, every window. Nothing was broken. Nothing was disturbed. Nothing made sense. At dawn, Eric reviewed footage from the night. At 2:51 a.m., the camera outside our sliding back door recorded something chilling. The door slid open. Just a few inches. Just enough for someone thin to slip inside. Noah. He stepped inside our home without hesitation, barefoot, moving with eerie softness. He walked through the kitchen, down the hallway, toward our bedroom, and then, right as he reached our door, the video glitched. Static. White noise. It didn't record anything else for nearly 3 minutes. When the feed resumed, he was gone. I felt sick, violated, terrified. The police responded immediately this time. They arrested Noah that afternoon. The marshals protested, shouted, cried, but the footage was damning. Inside our home, watching us sleep. When officers searched their property, they found Daisy. Alive, but terrified. Locked in their shed, dehydrated, whimpering. They found dozens of Polaroids too. All of our family. Our house, our children, some taken through windows we thought were secure, some taken while we slept. But the worst was a handwritten notebook labeled "The House I Belong In." Every page was filled with drawings of our home, Our rooms, us, notes about our routines, our schedules, our children's habits, our vulnerabilities. The Marshalls moved within a week, escorted by police. We sold our home a month later. Even now, in our new state, our new house, I double-check locks 3 times before bed. I close blinds before the sun even sets. I jump at footsteps outside. My children sleep with their doors locked, something we never did before. Sometimes, late at night, I wake to phantom scratching, and I wonder, how long did he watch us before we ever noticed? Story the end. The first week after we moved into our house on Willow Glen Lane felt almost too peaceful. The kind of suburban calm that makes you think nothing bad could ever happen there. The street was lined with big oak trees, wide lawns, and houses spaced comfortably apart. Kids rode their bikes in the afternoons. Parents watered their gardens in the early evenings. Everything looked like the kind of place people settled into for decades. But the house directly next door, the one on the left, was different. It wasn't run down or abandoned. In fact, it looked almost perfect. The lawn was immaculate, the shutters freshly painted, the porch light on every night exactly at sunset, yet no one ever seemed to come or go. No car in the driveway, no packages delivered, no lights turning on inside the rooms except for that one porch light. I didn't think much of it until the fourth night. I went out around 11 p.m. to take out the trash, and while lifting the lid of the bin, I heard something. A soft tapping, slow, steady, deliberate. Not from inside our house, not the wind, not an animal. It was coming from the fence line between our yard and the neighbors. I stepped closer, squinting through the darkness. The tapping stopped immediately. Silence swallowed the air. I stood there for a long moment, waiting for something to move. Nothing did. Finally, I shrugged it off and went back inside. The next morning, I found footprints near the fence. Bare footprints, and small, too small to belong to a grown adult, but too big to be from a child. The kind of size you'd expect from a teenager, maybe. Except the spacing between them looked wrong. Too far apart, like whoever left them had taken long, unnatural strides. I told my wife, Mara, about it over breakfast. She laughed nervously. Probably just some neighbor's kid messing around. Yeah, I said, though it didn't sit right with me. That night, things escalated. Mara had already gone to bed, and I was in the living room watching TV when our dog, Scout, lifted his head and started growling. His eyes were trained on the window facing the neighbor's house. I muted the TV and listened. At first, all I heard was my own breathing. Then, scratch. A long, slow, dragging noise against the siding of our house. I jumped up and ran to the window. The porch light next door flickered for a moment, then shut off. That was the first time in a week it had turned off at all. Scout barked, and I pulled him back as I peered out into the yard. Nothing. No movement. No shadow. No person. But the noise came again. Scratch, drag, scratch. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside before I had time to talk myself out of it. The air was cold and still. Still. My breath fogged in front of me. I scanned the side of the house with the beam, expecting anything. An animal, a branch blown by the wind, anything normal. But the side of our house was clear. Behind the fence, however, the beam caught something pale. A hand. Just a hand. Gripping the top of the fence tightly enough for the knuckles to strain white. The fingers were long, thin, and unmoving. I froze. The hand didn't move, didn't recoil, didn't tense. It just stayed there. Hey! I called out, my voice shaking. Who's there? Slowly, too slowly, the hand slid down the fence board and disappeared on the other side. Not quickly like someone startled or scared, more like someone calmly deciding to withdraw. I ran back inside and locked the door immediately. I hardly slept that night. 2 days passed with nothing new, no sounds, no footprints. The porch light next door stayed on again every night like clockwork. I started convincing myself that I'd imagined how creepy it had all been. Mara noticed I was tense, but I didn't want to scare her, so I played it off. On the third night, I woke to the sound of Scout barking violently. I shot up in bed. "What's that?" Mara whispered. I ran to the living room where Scout was clawing at the sliding glass door that led to the backyard. His teeth were bared, his body rigid. I flipped on the patio light and saw something that made my blood turn to ice. Our backyard gate, the one that had a padlock, was wide open. The padlock lay in the grass, snapped clean in half. I slowly approached the door, squinting through the glass. The yard was empty, quiet, motionless. Then I saw something in the far corner of the yard, small, dark, sitting on the ground. I unlocked the sliding door and stepped outside, my heart pounding. Scout barked behind me, but didn't leave the doorway. I walked toward the corner, and as I got closer, I realized it was a shoebox. A shoebox I didn't recognize. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. All taken of our house, some from the street, some from the side yard, some from directly outside our bedroom window. And then I found the ones that made me stumble backward. Photos of Mara sleeping, photos of me at the kitchen table, photos of Scout lying on the couch, taken from inside the house. The last photo in the box stopped my breath completely. It was a picture of me, and it had been taken through the crack of the slightly open bathroom door while I was brushing my teeth earlier that evening. He had been inside the house. I grabbed the box and ran inside. Mara screamed when she saw my face. "What happened? What's wrong?" I showed her the pictures. She covered her mouth, whispering, "Oh my God. Oh my God." We called the police. They searched everywhere, every room, every closet, every corner of the attic and crawl space. Nothing. They checked the neighbor's house, but no one answered. They told us they couldn't enter without a warrant. The officer who came gave a half-hearted shrug and said it was probably some neighborhood kid screwing around. But I knew better. Something was wrong next door. Something deeply wrong. We installed new locks, reinforced the windows, and put motion sensors around the property. For the next few days, everything stayed quiet. Then, around 2:30 a.m., on a Thursday night, one of the sensors went off, the one on the backyard fence. I checked the monitor. The camera feed was dark, fuzzy. The motion sensor pinged again. And then the screen lit up just enough to show a shape, tall, thin, crouched on top of the fence. It wasn't standing or sitting. It was perched, like an animal. Its head slowly turned toward the camera, and even with the grainy resolution, I saw its eyes, wide, unblinking, and shining in the night. I shook Mara awake. "We're leaving," I told her. "Right now." We grabbed whatever we could carry, shoved Scout in the car, and sped away without looking back. We didn't sleep until morning in a motel 2 towns away. Later that day, the police called. "We investigated the house next door after receiving multiple reports," the officer said. "Sir, there's something you should know." I braced myself. "That house didn't have anyone living in it," he continued. But there were signs someone had been entering it from the woods behind the property. Someone had been staying in the basement. There were bedding materials, food wrappers, and photographs of your family. My stomach dropped. "But that's not all," he added. "We found a staircase behind a false wall. It led down to a tunnel, directly under the fence line, and straight into your crawl space." My knees almost gave out. "There was a message scratched inside the tunnel?" the officer said. I waited, feeling the cold shiver crawl up my spine. His voice sounded tight when he read it aloud. "The walls are thin. I like listening." He paused. "And another one below it. I'll find you again." We moved across the country within a month. But sometimes at night, Scout lifts his head, growls at the window, and stares into the dark as if he sees something I can't. Something that followed. Something that still listens. Story the end. Rain had been falling steadily the night I moved into my new rental home in a quiet neighborhood outside Richmond, Virginia. The street was lined with small 2-story houses, each with tidy lawns and white fences. It looked peaceful. Boring, even. Exactly the kind of place I thought I needed after a rough divorce and months of living out of boxes. The house to my left was empty, according to the landlord. "Been vacant for a while," he said. "Old man who lived there passed away. Dad's family hasn't decided what to do with it." But that first night, as I carried boxes from my car to the door, I noticed a light flicker in the upstairs window of the supposedly empty house. It was faint, like the glow of a candle. I stared at it for a long moment. Then it blinked out. I told myself it was a trick of the rain on the glass, moving stress, exhaustion. I didn't give it more thought, not until the next morning. When I stepped onto my porch with a mug of coffee, I noticed footprints in the soft mud between my house and the vacant one. Deep, long prints like someone had been pacing in the middle of the night. They led right up to the dividing fence and then simply stopped. The ground on the other side was untouched. I knelt down, examining the prints. Bare feet, large. Whoever made them had stood there for a long time, watching. I should have called someone, but I brushed it off. New place, new paranoia. 2 days later, I learned the truth wasn't that comforting. I met my neighbor across the street, a friendly woman named Marlene, while checking my mail. She glanced at the empty house and lowered her voice. Strange that someone was inside last night. My heart skipped. Inside? Lights were on, she whispered. Saw someone moving around upstairs, a tall man. Never saw his face. I told her what my landlord said, that the place was empty. She gave me a look I didn't understand at the time, a mixture of sympathy and warning. Nothing on this street stays empty. Remember that. That night, around 11, I heard soft tapping from the direction of the empty house. Not random tapping, rhythmic, almost like someone gently drumming their fingers on the wall. Tap, 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 tap. I turned off my TV and listened. Tap, 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 tap. Then came a whisper, a long, drawn-out exhale of a whisper, like someone murmuring through drywall. I froze. It grew louder, closer. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside. Rain misted down again, thin and icy. The empty house loomed dark, but not completely. One upstairs window, the same one from my first night, had a faint glow behind it, like someone holding a candle just out of view. I approached cautiously, telling myself I was being ridiculous. As I got closer, the glow flickered and drifted left, as if someone walked past holding it. My breath caught. Then the tapping started again, this time from inside the house, right behind the wall nearest to me. I stepped back fast. The next morning I found something on my doorstep. A photograph. Black and white. Grainy, old. It showed a man standing in the backyard of the empty house. But the man was tall, too tall, his limbs strangely thin, and his face was just a blur, like it had been smeared with an eraser. Beneath the photo, written in shaky handwriting, "He lives next door." I dropped it like it was burning. I searched the neighborhood, called the landlord, even searched online for anything about the house, but nothing explained what I had seen or heard. The landlord insisted no one had a key except him and the family of the deceased owner, and both swore the house was locked and untouched. That night, I barely slept. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps outside my bedroom window. Slow, deliberate steps, crunching in the damp grass. I sat up in bed, trembling. The steps stopped right below my window. I didn't look. I couldn't bring myself to. A soft scraping sound started, like a fingernail running across the siding. Long, slow strokes, then shorter ones, like someone was scratching a message I couldn't understand. My breath shook as I whispered to myself, "Please go away, please go away." The scraping stopped. Then came a knock. Not on my door, on my window. 3 slow knocks. Deliberate. I pulled the covers over my mouth to keep from screaming. And then, in the darkness, a voice whispered through the glass. A deep, stretched-out whisper. "Do you know me yet?" I didn't sleep again until sunrise. When I finally looked outside, the grass under my window was trampled, and there were muddy handprints smeared on the glass. Large, too large to be normal. More worrying, they were smeared from the inside out, like something had pressed against the glass from my bedroom's interior. I felt sick. I called Marlene. She came over trembling, like she already knew. "You need to understand," she said, gripping my arm. "That house didn't get empty. It got abandoned. People move in, but they don't stay. They always say the same thing." "What?" Her eyes filled with tears. "Someone lives there who shouldn't. Someone who watches the neighbors." I shook my head. "But it's locked. No one." She cut me off, whispering, "He doesn't use doors." That was when I decided to leave. But leaving wasn't simple. When I tried to pack, items had been moved. My suitcase had been unzipped and laid open on the floor. Clothes neatly folded beside it, though I hadn't folded anything. A piece of paper had been placed on top, familiar handwriting. "You can't leave yet." My hands shook so violently I dropped the suitcase. I went outside for air and froze. The door of the empty house was open, wide open. The interior was pitch dark, like the darkness had weight, and from inside I heard faint breathing, not human breathing, slow, deep, cavernous. I stepped back, heart slamming so hard I could hear my pulse. Then something moved inside. A tall silhouette. Thin, wrong. Its head grazed the top of the doorway. I ran inside my house and locked every door, every window, every latch. Night came like a punishment. The moment the sun dipped below the trees, the tapping began again. This time louder, closer, moving along the walls of my house like something circling, marking territory. Then came the voice. "Do you know me yet?" It echoed through the vents, through the floors, through the walls. I called 911. They said they'd send a car. No one came. The house fell silent for a moment, too silent. Then, footsteps creaked inside my attic, slow, heavy, and then fast, darting across the ceiling above my bedroom. I shot up, grabbed my phone, and backed into the hallway. Something came down the attic steps. One step, a pause, then another, heavy enough to make the whole frame shake. I ran to the front door, fumbling with the lock. Behind me, the attic door creaked fully open. A long, slow exhale filled the house. I didn't look back. I ran into the night and didn't stop until my lungs burned. I stayed in a motel for 3 days. When I returned with the landlord and police, everything in my house was untouched. No footprints, no handprints, no photos, no scratches. But the empty house next door? Its front door was locked tight. The police said no one had been inside. They brushed me off, told me to rest. But as I stood there, staring at the quiet house, I saw it again. A figure in the upstairs window, tall, motionless, watching. And as I backed away, I swear, on everything I have left, that the blinds slowly closed by themselves. I moved out that same week. Found a small apartment in the city. Yep, tried to forget. 2 months later, I got a piece of mail, no return address. Inside was a single photograph, me, standing in my new apartment kitchen, taken through the window. On the back, in the same shaky handwriting as before, "Next door is not a place, it's me." Story, the end. The night I moved into the duplex on Maple Ridge Lane, I remember thinking how peaceful everything felt. The street was lined with old oak trees that rustled softly in the breeze, and the houses had that classic American charm. White siding, front porches, neat lawns. My place was the left half of a 2-unit home. The right half, I was told, belonged to a man named Alan. The landlord described him as quiet, keeps to himself, no trouble at all. Quiet, I could handle. I liked quiet, but the first time I saw Alan, something about him didn't sit right with me. It was around dusk on my second day. I was taking out the trash when I noticed him standing on his side of the porch. His expression was blank, almost empty, like he wasn't really seeing anything in front of him. His face was pale, his hair slightly unkempt, and his clothes looked a little too big on him. He nodded when he saw me, but the nod didn't feel normal. It was slow, delayed, as if he was mimicking the gesture instead of doing it naturally. I nodded back, tried to smile, and hurried back inside. For the next week or so, we had only small interactions. He didn't say much, just greetings that felt rehearsed or stares that lasted a little too long. When I'd come home from work, he'd sometimes already be outside, standing on his porch, facing my car like he'd been waiting. It was weird, but not dangerous. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Then the noises started. Duplex walls aren't thick, but I had lived in an apartment before. I expected some sound. What I didn't expect were the patterns. Around midnight every night, I'd hear Alan pacing. Not casual pacing. Steady, measured steps from one side of his living room to the other, stopping exactly every 5 steps, pausing 3 seconds, then returning. Over and over. Sometimes for hours. At first, I assumed he had insomnia or maybe anxiety. But after 2 weeks, the pacing changed. I began hearing scratching, soft at first, like someone dragging their fingernails along the drywall, then louder, faster, frantic. One night, the scratching came right from behind my bedroom wall. I shot up in bed, heart pounding. The sound was so sharp I thought he might break through. I yelled, "Alan, are you okay?" The scratching stopped immediately. Silence. I waited, holding my breath, listening. Then, directly behind the wall, he whispered, "Sorry." I practically jumped out of my skin. The whisper was so close, so low, like he stood with his mouth pressed against the wall. I barely slept. The next morning, I tried to bring it up casually. When I stepped outside, he was already on his porch again, staring at me. Or maybe staring through me. I couldn't tell. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "Rough night?" He blinked slowly. "Walls talk," he said. I froze. "What?" "The walls," he repeated, voice monotone. "They talk at night. Hard to ignore them." I forced a laugh, even though dread curled inside me. "Walls don't really talk." He tilted his head. "Yours does." I decided then that I needed to start looking for another place. But moving isn't easy, and the next available rental wasn't for another month. I told myself I could handle it for 4 more weeks. But things got worse, much worse. A few nights later, around 1 a.m., I woke to the sound of tapping, slow and steady, tap, tap, tap from my closet. Daisy, my little terrier, bolted upright on the bed and stared at the closet door, growling softly. My heart thudded as I slid out of bed and approached the door. "Alan?" I asked, though saying his name out loud felt ridiculous. He couldn't be inside my closet. The tapping stopped. For a second, everything was silent. Then, from the other side of the wall, behind my closet, I heard breathing. Loud, shaky breathing, like someone trying to stay quiet and failing. I stepped back, grabbed my phone, and almost called the police. But what would I say? My neighbor is breathing too loudly? The next morning, when I went outside, Alan wasn't on his porch. It was the first time he wasn't waiting. Relieved, I headed to my car, then froze. My driver's side window had the faint outline of a handprint. Not dusty, not dirty, just condensation, like someone had pressed their palm there early in the morning. Except it was cold outside, too cold for condensation to form. I looked toward Alan's windows. His curtains were drawn, but I swear I saw movement behind them, a shadow shifting, then disappearing. That night, I installed a camera on my porch, another in the living room facing the shared wall, one more in my bedroom. I went to bed uneasy, feeling watched. Around 2:17 a.m., I woke to Daisy barking furiously at the bedroom door. Before I could react, my phone buzzed with a notification from the porch camera. Movement detected. I opened the app, expecting a raccoon. Instead, the screen showed Alan, standing inches from my front door. But what made my blood freeze wasn't that he was there. It was how he was there. His body wasn't facing the door. His body was facing sideways. But his head was turned a full 90 degrees directly toward the camera, staring straight into the lens with unblinking eyes. The position wasn't human, not remotely. Then he smiled. Not the slow, awkward smile he'd given me before. A wide, stretched, unnatural grin that didn't match his eyes at all. Suddenly, the feed cut to black. I didn't sleep for even a second. At sunrise, I marched to the landlord's office and demanded they do something. They said they'd talk to him immediately. Whether they did or not, I'll never know, because when I got home from work, something was pinned to my front door. A piece of paper. On it were drawings, sketches, frantic and messy, of me sleeping. My bed, my room, my silhouette under the blankets. Dozens of drawings, all from different angles. Angles someone could only know if they'd been in my room. On the last page, written in shaky handwriting, "The walls let me in." I threw up right there on the porch. That night, I barricaded my bedroom door with furniture and kept every light on. I held Daisy close while she trembled in my arms. Every sound made my skin crawl. I didn't know if he was in his unit or mine. I didn't know if he was outside or inside the walls. Around 3 a.m., the pacing started again, but this time it wasn't next door. It was in my hallway. Slow, deliberate steps. I held my breath. The steps stopped directly outside my bedroom door. Silence. Then, from the other side, in that same quiet whisper I'd heard through the wall, he said, "Your walls are talking too." I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the doorknob started to turn. Not rattling, not forced, slow, curious, testing. I grabbed my phone and called 911, whispering frantically. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and hide. But before I could move, Daisy let out a vicious bark. Then another. Then she lunged at the door, snarling like she was ready to rip someone apart. The doorknob froze. Then footsteps retreated. Slowly, calmly. By the time the police arrived, he was gone. His side of the duplex was empty, completely empty. No furniture, no clothes, no food, no signs anyone had ever lived there. Except one thing. In the living room, carved into the shared wall with deep, jagged scratches, were the words, "Thank you for letting me in." I moved out that same morning. I never found out where Alan went. The landlord claimed he hadn't seen him in weeks. Police said the place hadn't been officially rented to anyone since the last tenant left months before I arrived. Sometimes, late at night in my new home across the city, I swear I still hear scratching in the walls. Sometimes pacing, and sometimes when I'm half asleep I hear a quiet whisper close to my ear. Walls talk. Story the end. The day the Richardson family moved in next door, the whole neighborhood seemed relieved. Their house had been vacant for nearly a year after the previous owner died alone inside, something nobody talked about openly, but everyone whispered about once the sun went down. The Richardson place was one of those old American houses built in the early 60s, pale yellow siding, a porch swing that creaked even when the wind was still, and an attic window that looked like an eye watching over the street. From the first moment I saw them, something felt wrong. John Richardson, the father, was tall, clean-cut, overly friendly in a way that didn't feel real. His wife, Linda, never smiled. She just stared ahead with glazed eyes, nodding occasionally at nothing. Their son, maybe 12 years old, had a face so pale he looked almost translucent. He never went to school, never spoke, never left the house except at night. But nobody wanted to judge them. New neighbors were new neighbors. Still, the first thing I noticed after they moved in was the sound. Every night around 3 a.m., something heavy dragged across their floors. Long, slow movements, like furniture being slid deliberately across wood. But the Richardsons never rearranged anything. You could see into their house from the street. The layout never changed. It wasn't furniture. I tried to ignore it. But ignoring things only works until they knock at your door. The first real incident happened 2 weeks after they moved in. I came home from work to find muddy footprints on my porch. Not shoe prints, bare feet. Large, wide, and facing my front door. I looked around, expecting someone to be lurking nearby, but the street was empty. The mud was thick and dark, and when I crouched down to look more closely, I noticed something strange stuck in the tracks. Small, torn pieces of wet paper, like something had disintegrated. I brushed them aside and went inside, locking the door even though it was broad daylight. That night, around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of that dragging again. Only this time it wasn't coming from their house. It was coming from mine. Something scraped across my roof, slow and steady, moving toward my bedroom window. Bailey, my dog, whimpered and cowered under the bed. She never did that. I didn't open the curtains. I couldn't. When I gathered the courage to look the next morning, I found long, parallel scratches above the window frame. Deep ones, like claws or fingertips. Over the next few days, I started seeing the Richardson boy more often, always at strange times. He'd stand in their upstairs window, the attic one, staring down at my yard. His face expressionless, his eyes too large, too dark. Every time I looked up, he was already watching me. One morning, I found him standing behind my fence, hands gripping the wood, his thin fingers wrapped around the slats. I nearly dropped my coffee. "Hey," I said, trying to sound calm. "You need something?" He didn't blink. His lips barely parted as he whispered, "Do you hear it too?" "Hear what?" "The crawling." Before I could respond, John Richardson appeared out of nowhere and grabbed the boy's shoulders. "Sorry about that," he said too cheerfully. "My son sometimes wanders. We're working on it." The boy didn't struggle. He didn't react at all. He just kept staring at me over his father's shoulder until John dragged him inside and the door slammed shut. My skin crawled for hours after that. The next incident was worse. I woke up again around 3 a.m. Same dragging sound, same crawling noise on the roof, but this time there was something else. Breathing. Heavy, wet breathing outside my bedroom wall. I froze. The breathing got closer. Then a whisper. "Let me in." I shot out of bed and grabbed my phone with shaking hands. I didn't even dial. I just opened the flashlight and shined it toward the window. 2 pale hands were pressed against the glass from the outside. Long fingers, too long. They scraped downward slowly, leaving streaks of mud and something darker. I stumbled back, heart racing, but when I blinked, the hands were gone. Just gone. No footsteps, no running, nothing. The next morning, I found muddy footprints circling my entire house again. Perfect circles, exactly like before. But this time they weren't adult-sized. They were small. Child-sized. I called the police that afternoon. They checked the area, asked if I had enemies, asked if I'd been drinking. When I mentioned the Richardsons, their expressions changed. "We've checked on that family before," one officer said. "Multiple noise complaints, strange behavior, welfare checks, never found anything serious." "Who lived there before them?" I asked. They exchanged looks. "Just an older woman," the officer said finally. "Died in the house. Natural causes." But something in his voice told me he didn't believe it. And I knew then I wasn't the first one to complain about that house, but I might be the only one still alive to talk about it. That night, everything escalated. I heard the dragging again, but this time the sound was inside my walls. Not the attic, not the roof, the walls. Something moved between the studs, scratching, clawing, breathing. Bailey barked furiously at the drywall until she started shaking uncontrollably. I backed slowly toward the living room, gripping a kitchen knife like it would help me. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out. The house plunged into darkness. I stood frozen, unable to breathe, my ears ringing with the sound of something moving inside the walls. Then, knock, knock, knock. Someone was at my door. I edged toward it, trying to see through the peephole, but then I heard it. Please open. It was the Richardson boy. His voice was wrong, flat, empty, like someone was speaking through him. I didn't unlock the door. The knocking grew louder, faster, desperate. Then it stopped. I waited, listening. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Finally, I peeked outside. He was gone. But someone else had left something on my porch, a piece of paper, wet, torn. I picked it up slowly. It was a photograph, a picture of me, sleeping, taken through my bedroom window. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with all the lights on, the knife in my hand, Bailey trembling beside me. Around 3 a.m., the Richardson house lights flickered on all at once, blinding white, then off, then on again, flickering so fast it looked like lightning. In the flashes, I saw shapes behind their windows, multiple shapes, crawling across the floor, scaling the walls, stretching unnaturally. One shape stood upright in the attic window, staring at me. The boy, his mouth hanging open too wide like something was pushing it from inside. Then all the lights went out. The street went silent, and I knew something was coming. I tried to run. I grabbed Bailey and darted toward my back door, but someone was already standing there. John Richardson, blocking my path. But he looked wrong, too. Gaunt, twisted, his face stretched tight as if something behind his skin was pressing forward. "You shouldn't leave," he whispered. I stepped back slowly. Behind him, the Richardson boy crawled into view. Not walked. Crawled. His limbs bending wrong, his joints twisting unnaturally. Something moved under his shirt. Something alive. I screamed. They moved toward me as one. I slammed the door shut and sprinted to the front, bursting outside into the freezing night. I didn't look back. I didn't grab anything. I just ran until my lungs burned. I never returned to that house. I moved 3 states away within a week, changed my number, started over completely. But 2 nights ago, I woke up at 3 a.m. to a familiar sound. Dragging. Right above my ceiling. Bailey whimpered and hid under the bed. My heart froze. Then someone knocked softly on my window. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't open the curtains, but I didn't need to, because a moment later, I heard a whisper I will never forget. "Let me in, neighbor." I don't know how they found me. I don't know what they want, but I know one thing. They're not human, and they're not done. Story the end. The night I moved into my duplex on Elmwood Street, I remember thinking how peaceful the neighborhood felt. A tree-lined road, quiet families, porch lights glowing in the dark like little safety beacons. It felt safe, familiar, American in the way you'd expect from a suburban street a few miles outside Indianapolis. My neighbor on the other side of the duplex, though, he was different. The landlord said his name was Daniel. Quiet guy, she told me. Keeps to himself, pays rent on time. But from the moment I first saw him, something about him unsettled me. He stood in his doorway as I carried boxes inside, watching, expressionless. No smile, no wave. His eyes followed me like he was memorizing how I moved, what I carried, the rhythm of my steps. I gave a nervous wave anyway. He blinked slowly and stepped back inside without a word. I told myself he was just socially awkward. Lots of people are. But deep down, something felt wrong, like I'd stepped into a story I didn't know the beginning of. The duplex shared a wall, and within the first week, I learned more about Daniel than I wanted to. At night, I'd hear footsteps pacing his living room. Not normal walking, slow, steady, repetitive, like someone wearing down a path in the floor. Sometimes he laughed to himself, a low, breathy laugh that made my skin prickle. Other nights, he talked quietly for hours, though I could never make out the words. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard a knock. Not at my front door, not at my back door, at the wall. The shared wall. 3 slow knocks, then silence, then 3 more. I froze in bed, staring at the dark, listening. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't answer. The next morning, I found a sticky note tucked under my doormat. "He's awake at night. Don't make noise." No signature, no explanation. I stared at the little yellow square until my coffee went cold. Was it from Daniel or someone warning me about him? That evening, I heard something new. Dragging. Something heavy scraping across the floor in Daniel's living room. A dull thud. More dragging. Then a long sigh. I turned the TV up louder and tried to ignore it. A few days later, I noticed things inside my home were shifting. Small things. Keys placed in different spots. Cabinet doors left slightly open when I was absolutely sure I'd closed them. My shower curtain pushed open as if someone had stood inside earlier. One morning, my fridge door was wide open, food scattered on the floor. I had no memory of getting up during the night. I called my landlord, asking whether previous tenants had any issues. She hesitated. Not exactly, she said. Just keep your doors locked and don't engage with Daniel too much. That was the moment I realized she was hiding something. Things escalated 2 nights later. I was brushing my teeth when I heard a whisper. My first thought was that my phone had turned on. But the whisper wasn't coming from inside my bathroom. It was coming from behind the mirror. I leaned in, toothpaste still foaming in my mouth. The voice was faint, breathy. I see you. I stumbled back so fast I nearly slipped. I pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. That night, I slept with a lamp on. Around 3 a.m., I woke to footsteps. Not in Daniel's unit, but in mine. Slow, soft, deliberate. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The steps crept down my hallway one at a time, then stopped outside my bedroom door. A soft exhale, then a low whisper. Are you awake? I shot upright, flicked on every light, grabbed the baseball bat I kept next to the bed. My bedroom door was closed. No footsteps retreated, no sound at all. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers. The police searched every room. Nothing. All windows locked. No sign of forced entry. No footprints. But when I walked them out, Daniel was standing in his doorway, staring at me with a blank expression. One of the officers asked if he'd heard anything. Daniel smiled. A slow, unnatural smile. No, he said softly, but I've been keeping an eye on her. She walks in her sleep. I don't sleepwalk. The officer gave me a look that said, maybe you're stressed. They left soon after. Once they were gone, Daniel and I stood facing each other across the small patch of lawn between our doors. You shouldn't call the police at night, he said. It wakes him up. Who? I whispered. He pointed at the wall between our homes. Him. Then he went inside and shut his door. The next night I left a chair under my doorknob and slept in my clothes. I didn't dare close my eyes until the sun came up. But in the morning, when I went to make coffee, I saw something that nearly made me fall to my knees. My back door, dead-bolted the night before, was unlocked. On the kitchen counter, written in dust, was one word. Hello, I packed a small bag and booked a hotel room for the next 2 nights. But before I left, I wanted to check one thing. I went to the basement, somewhere I'd avoided since moving in. The light switch flickered twice before staying on. At first glance, nothing seemed off. Just a normal basement. Concrete floor, boxes, an old washer and dryer. But something about the far wall looked different. A patch of drywall that didn't quite match the rest. Too new. Too smooth. I pressed my hand against it. Hollow. My stomach turned. I pushed harder. The seam cracked. A small panel fell inward, revealing a dark crawl space behind it. Inside was a thin mattress, a lantern, empty food containers, a Polaroid camera, and dozens of photos pinned to the inside of the wall. Photos of me, sleeping, cooking, working, sitting on my couch, brushing my hair, some taken through windows, some taken from inside my home, and one taken in my bedroom while I slept. A sound came from the crawl space, a breath, not mine. I ran up the stairs so fast I nearly fell, grabbed my keys, and bolted out the door. As I reached my car, Daniel stepped outside, watching me with that same empty expression. You can't leave, he said calmly. He likes you. He doesn't want you to go. I didn't respond, didn't look back. I drove away and never returned. A friend gathered the rest of my belongings weeks later. I tried to forget Elmwood Street, tried to forget Daniel, tried to forget the photos. But sometimes late at night, I wake up with the same feeling I had in that duplex, that someone is standing over me, watching. Sometimes I hear dragging in my hallway. Sometimes I hear whispering behind the walls. Sometimes I find my back door unlocked in the morning. I moved states, changed my number, filed police reports, everything. But last week, in my new apartment, I found something under my doormat. A single Polaroid of me, sleeping. Story the end. The night I moved into my new place in Cedar Ridge, Colorado, I told myself the quiet was a good thing. After years of living in a cramped apartment above a noisy bar in Denver, the stillness felt like a relief. The house was a small gray ranch style with a big oak tree in the front yard and a backyard that sloped toward the forest. The price had been surprisingly low, but the real estate agent said the previous owner just needed to sell quickly. I didn't ask questions. I just wanted space, quiet and room to breathe. My next-door neighbor was the only house close to mine, just a dozen feet away. A narrow path of gravel separated our side yards, and from my kitchen window I had a clear view of his living room. His house was similar in design, but older, with peeling paint and a porch swing that creaked even when no one was on it. The first time I saw him was early the next morning. He was standing on his porch, wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt, staring directly at my house, not casually glancing, staring. He didn't turn away when I stepped outside with my coffee. Instead, he lifted his hands slowly and waved. "Morning," he called out. I forced a smile and waved back. "Morning." He kept staring until I went back inside. I tried to shake off the weirdness. Maybe he was just curious about a new neighbor, but by the second week, his curiosity felt more like surveillance. He seemed to appear every time I stepped outside, without fail. If I went to check the mail, he was suddenly watering plants, even though his yard was mostly just dirt and a few patches of grass. If I sat on my deck to read, he would wander outside and stand by his fence, pretending to be adjusting something on the siding. Sometimes I'd catch him looking directly into my kitchen window from his living room, lights off, face barely visible except for the pale outline. I tried to avoid him, but living next door made that nearly impossible. One evening, as I was taking out the trash, he seemed to materialize beside me. "You live alone?" he asked. The question was too blunt, too direct. Something in his tone felt probing. "Why?" I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. He shrugged. "Helps to know who's around. People go missing out here sometimes." He smiled when he said it, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. That night, I double-checked every lock in the house. A few days later, I found something strange behind my backyard fence. A small pile of stones stacked neatly, almost like a marker. At the top was a Polaroid photo, blurry but unmistakable. It was a picture of the back of my head, taken while I was unloading boxes from my car the day I moved in. My stomach dropped. I looked around the yard, scanning the trees and the path beside the house. Nothing moved, no sound. Just the wind brushing through leaves. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was kids or some kind of prank. But deep down, I knew exactly who had taken the picture. I didn't confront him. I wanted evidence, something I could show the police before they brushed me off. So I bought cameras, 4 of them, and mounted them discreetly around the house, front porch, backyard, side yard, and one facing the path between our houses. That night, I barely slept. I kept checking the live feeds every hour. Around 2:14 a.m., I finally drifted off. At 3:07 a.m., my phone buzzed with a motion alert. I grabbed it, heart already pounding. Camera 3, side yard. I tapped the notification with trembling fingers, expecting maybe a raccoon or a branch blowing in the wind. But there he was, my neighbor, standing perfectly still in the middle of the path between our houses. Just standing, not moving, not walking. Just staring upward at my bedroom window. He stayed like that for almost 5 minutes. Then he stepped closer. So close his face filled the camera, pale and expressionless. He leaned forward, fogging the lens with his breath. Then he pressed his ear to the siding of my house, as if he were listening. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I downloaded the clip and drove straight to the small sheriff's office in town. The deputy watched the video, brows furrowing. "That's weird," he said slowly, but he didn't try to break in. Might just be sleepwalking. "He was listening to my house," I said. "That's not sleepwalking." The deputy shrugged, clearly unconvinced. "I'll go have a talk with him." I knew it wouldn't help. People like my neighbor don't stop because someone asks nicely. That night, the cameras caught nothing. No motion alerts, no shadowy figures, no pacing. I almost convinced myself he had gotten the message. But the next morning, I woke to something worse. On my porch, leaning against the door, was a piece of wood. A long, flat board with the words, "I hear you too," carved deeply into it. I stumbled backward, heart hammering. I ran to check the cameras, but the front porch feed was nothing but static. Someone had disabled it. I shut all the blinds, locked every door, and debated calling the police again. But what would I say? A creepy message wasn't illegal. Not here, not in a place where mind your own business was practically a motto. That night, I slept in the living room with a baseball bat and every light on. Around 1:50 a.m., something woke me. A sound. A soft, rhythmic tapping. Not at the doors. Not at the windows. From the attic. I froze. The attic had only one entrance, a small pull-down ladder in the hallway. I hadn't been up there since I moved in. My heart pounded so loud I swore I could hear it echo off the walls. Tap, tap, tap. Not like footsteps, more like fingers. I grabbed the bat and stood beneath the attic door, staring at the thin string that hung down from it. I didn't want to touch it. I wanted to run out of the house and never come back. But then the tapping stopped. Silence filled the house. I stood there for what felt like an hour before finally retreating back to the living room. When morning came, I mustered the courage to pull down the attic ladder. It creaked loudly, the sound making me wince. Dust rained down and a stale, cold draft seeped through the opening. I climbed halfway up and looked around with a flashlight. At first I didn't see anything, just boxes and old insulation. Then the beam caught something in the corner. A small folding chair. And next to it, a notebook. I climbed fully into the attic, stomach twisting. The notebook was open, pages filled with handwriting. I picked it up, flipping through. Every page had a date, and every date had an entry about me. Lights off at 11:42. Phone call with someone, male voice. Laughed at something on TV. Showered for 8 minutes. And then the last entry. She doesn't know I'm in here. She breathes loud when she's afraid. My body went cold. I whipped the flashlight to the far corner, and that's when I saw the vent. A small square opening that led directly into the crawl space between our houses. A crawl space someone could easily slip through. I bolted down the ladder, slammed it shut, and ran outside. But he was already waiting, standing in his yard, smiling. "There you are," he said. "You move quietly in the mornings." I got in my car and drove straight to the sheriff's office again. This time, I didn't ask. I demanded help. I showed the notebook, the attic, the video, everything. They arrested him. Breaking and entering, harassment, trespassing, illegal surveillance, but you can only hold someone for so long. 3 weeks later, he was released. I had already moved by then, packed everything I owned into a U-Haul, and drove back toward Denver, choosing an apartment on the 3rd floor. No neighbors beside me, no attic, no crawl spaces. I thought I was safe. Then, yesterday morning, I found something taped to my apartment door. A Polaroid. Of me. Sleeping. Story. The end. The night I moved into the duplex in upstate New York, the street was quieter than I expected. The real estate agent had told me it was a low-key, family-friendly neighborhood, but something about the silence felt heavy, like the air itself was listening. I shrugged it off. I was 28, tired and fresh off a breakup. I just wanted a cheap place to start over. My next-door neighbor introduced himself the following morning. He walked over while I was unloading furniture from my car. Middle-aged, thinning brown hair combed too neatly, crisp button-down shirt tucked into jeans like he dressed for an interview every day. He smiled too wide. "I'm Daniel," he said. "I live on the right side of the duplex. We'll be close now." He emphasized the word close in a way that made me pause, but he seemed harmless, maybe just lonely. I thanked him for helping carry my small dresser inside. He insisted, actually, almost too eager. That afternoon, I noticed one of my living room windows was slightly open. I assumed I hadn't latched it, though I was almost certain I had. When I closed it, I felt something catch under my palm, a soft click, almost like someone had been sliding it open from the outside. I didn't mention it to Daniel. Something about the way he watched the window as he passed by outside, eyes flicking toward me, then away, made my stomach tighten. The first unusual thing happened 3 days later. I was lying in bed around 11 p.m., drifting off, when I heard the softest tapping on the shared wall. At first I thought I imagined it, but then it came again, slow, precise, tap, tap, tap. I sat up. My bedroom and Daniel's mirrored each other. I assumed he was hanging something or maybe dropping something. Then the tapping shifted into scraping, light, deliberate scrapes like a fingernail dragged down drywall. I held my breath. The scraping stopped, and then, faintly, a whisper came through the wall. A man's voice. Very close. So close it sounded like he had pressed his lips to the drywall. "Are you awake?" I froze. He said it like he already knew the answer, like he'd been waiting for me to move. I didn't reply. I didn't make a sound. Eventually, after what felt like forever, the whisper stopped, but I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, Daniel greeted me cheerfully at the mailbox, as if he hadn't whispered through my wall at midnight. "Settling in okay?" he asked. "Yeah." I forced out, You didn't hear anything weird last night, did you? Tapping or talking? The smile dropped off his face so completely it shocked me. No, he said flatly. Nothing. Then he turned away and went inside without another word. Over the following week, things escalated in small, unsettling ways. I'd come home to find my porch light unscrewed, barely clinging to the socket. My kitchen drawer would be open when I was sure I'd closed it. Once, I found my bedroom door locked from the inside. Worst of all, one night around 2 in the morning, I woke to the unmistakable sound of footsteps in the attic above my room. Slow, measured footsteps. The duplex only had one attic, shared between both units. The only access door was in the hallway on my side. I lay still as the footsteps moved directly over my bed, the boards groaning softly with each shift of weight. Then something stopped directly above me. The wood creaked like someone kneeling. When the thudding started, 3 heavy raps right over my head, I bolted out of my room, heart hammering. I slept the rest of the night on the couch with every light on. The next morning, I confronted Daniel. "Were you in the attic last night?" I asked, trying to sound firm. He opened his door only a few inches, peering through the crack. "No," he said. "Why would I go into your attic?" "Our attic," I corrected. He closed the door without another word. That evening, I bought a padlock for the attic door. Around midnight, I heard rustling above me again, but this time the footsteps went to the far side, toward Daniel's half. That made even less sense. His unit didn't have an attic entrance, unless he'd been climbing up from mine, when the lock hadn't been there. The next weekend, I took the day to set up security cameras, one at the back door, one at the front, and one covering the hallway with the attic door. I didn't tell Daniel. That night, nothing happened. But the next morning, I woke to find the hallway camera unplugged. The cord lay neatly coiled on the floor beside it. The camera itself sat upright, undamaged, pointed directly toward the attic door, like someone had placed it back after unplugging it. I checked the footage. The screen was solid static from 1:14 a.m. until 4:02 a.m. Then it came back on again, perfectly fine. Someone had been in the house. Someone careful. I called the police. An officer came, took notes, and did the usual dismissive routine. No signs of forced entry. Probably the wiring. Nothing to justify further action. Daniel watched from his front steps the entire time, arms crossed over his chest. When the officer left, Daniel smiled at me. This time it wasn't friendly, it was knowing, almost amused. "You shouldn't call people unless you're sure," he said. "You make things worse." I didn't answer. 2 nights later, the real nightmare began. I woke around 3:30 to the sound of footsteps, both above me in the attic and outside my bedroom door. I sat up in bed, shaking. The doorknob rattled softly, not turning, just testing, gently, patiently. I grabbed the baseball bat I kept beside the bed. The rattling stopped. Silence stretched on for what felt like 10 minutes. Then, from the other side of the door, someone whispered, "Let me show you something." It was Daniel's voice, not a doubt in my mind. I didn't move, didn't breathe. The whisper came again, lower this time, almost a hiss. "You need to see it." Suddenly, footsteps darted across the hall toward the attic door. Then, pounding, furious, violent pounding, shook the ceiling above me. Something was raging overhead, dragging something heavy, stomping. I called 911 with trembling hands. While I waited, I backed into the corner of my room, bat raised, listening to the chaos above me. Then something hit the ceiling so hard dust rained down onto my bed. The pounding moved toward the far side, the side above Daniel's home, then abruptly stopped. Complete silence. By the time police arrived, everything was quiet. They searched the attic. It was empty. Not just empty, clean. Too clean. Except for one thing. In the corner, near where the knee wall met the rafters, was a nest of blankets. Old ones. Gray, stained, bunched together like someone had been sleeping in them. The officer shined a flashlight on it. "You said the attic was locked?" "Padlocked," I said. "Not anymore." The padlock lay on the attic floor, sawed clean through. The police questioned Daniel. He claimed total ignorance. Said he'd been asleep. Said he heard nothing. Their search of his unit turned up nothing. No tools. No signs of forced entry. No attic access. They left shortly after. I didn't sleep. I sat awake in the living room until dawn, watching shadows crawl across the walls as headlights passed outside. I kept thinking about the blanket nest, the footsteps, Daniel's voice at my door. The next day, I took off work. I spent hours packing. I couldn't stay, not another night. I hauled the last box to my car around noon. Before I could get in, Daniel stepped out onto his porch. "You're leaving," he said. "Not a question." I nodded, keeping distance between us. He tilted his head, studying me with eyes that didn't blink nearly enough. "You weren't supposed to look in the attic." I froze. He stepped closer, hands clasped calmly behind his back. "You never would have heard anything if you hadn't listened so hard. Sometimes you make noise by trying not to." I opened my door, heart racing. "Goodbye, Daniel." As I slid into my car seat, he leaned slightly forward, voice dropping to a soothing, awful softness. "They're going to miss you up there." I drove away without looking back. 2 weeks later, settled in a new apartment miles away, I got a text from the landlord of the duplex. "Did you leave something in the attic?" New tenant reported noises. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. I typed back, "There's nothing of mine left in that house." Before I hit send, I noticed something on my own ceiling. A faint sound. 3 soft taps, then a drag like fingers moving slowly across wood. I stood perfectly still, breath caught in my throat. Another whisper, barely audible, filtered down from above. "You heard us." Story the end. I moved into my townhouse in rural Pennsylvania at the beginning of last spring, convinced that the quiet, tree-lined street would finally give me the peace I'd been craving. The place was cheap, too cheap in hindsight, and although I assumed it was because of the property's age, I quickly learned the real reason. My next-door neighbor, an older man named Howard Mills, was introduced to me by the landlord as a quiet guy who keeps to himself. He lived alone, had no visitors, and rarely left his house. The landlord said all this like it was a selling point. At the time, I believed it. A quiet neighbor sounded like a blessing. The first strange thing happened during my second week. I had stepped outside around 10 p.m. to bring in a package when I noticed Howard standing in his front window. He was completely still, staring straight ahead, but the weird part was that he wasn't looking outside. He was facing the inside of his own house, just standing there unmoving like he was watching something on an invisible screen. The next morning, I chalked it up to eccentricity. So the man was weird. Lots of people were. But then came the noises. Every night, without fail, a soft scraping sound echoed through the shared wall between our homes. At first, I thought Howard might be dragging furniture around, but it didn't sound like that. It sounded methodical, slow, like someone scratching the paint intentionally over and over again. The rhythm was unsettling. 3 slow scrapes, a pause, 4 quick ones, another pause, then it would repeat. I banged on the wall once, irritated and tired from not sleeping. The scraping stopped instantly. A few minutes later, there was a single knock on the wall. Not frantic, not angry, just one knock, soft. Deliberate. I froze. I put my ear against the wall and listened. Nothing, just silence. The next day, I saw Howard outside for the first time. He was kneeling in his yard, digging a neat, narrow trench along the edge of his house with a small gardening spade. The trench was deep, deeper than any normal garden bed would require. His hands shook violently, yet his movements were precise. I approached him cautiously. "Morning," I said. He didn't respond at first. Then, without looking at me, he whispered, "You shouldn't have knocked back." I felt goosebumps rise on my arms. "I'm sorry, It listens," he interrupted, voice trembling. "It always listens." I didn't know what to say, so I mumbled something about going to work and hurried inside. That night, the scraping didn't happen. Instead, I heard murmuring, 2 voices. One was definitely Howard's. The other sounded distorted, unnatural, like someone trying to speak through water. I pressed my ear to the wall again. Howard whispered, "Not tonight, please, it's not ready." The second voice replied, low and garbled. Then the sound of something heavy sliding across the floor echoed through the wall. I backed away from the wall and slept with the lights on. The following morning, I noticed something odd along the fence line between our properties. Dead birds, 6 of them, arranged in a straight line. Their necks were broken cleanly, and each of them faced Howard's house. When I went out to move them, Howard burst through his front door. "Don't touch them," he yelled, voice cracking. I flinched back. "Howard, what's going on?" "They're warnings," he said, breathless. "If you move them, it'll start with you." He hurriedly picked up each bird, placing them carefully into a black trash bag. I stood there, unsure if I should call someone. That night, the scraping returned. louder than before. It no longer sounded like it was coming from the wall. It sounded like it was inside my house. I tore through my living room searching for the source. That's when I noticed the vent grate along the floorboards was loose. The scraping was coming from there. Slow, steady, deliberate. Heart pounding, I crouched and leaned in. Something scraped the inside of the vent again, this time so close it vibrated the metal against my fingertips. I stumbled back, grabbed my phone, and called the landlord. He brushed it off as a rodent issue and said he'd send someone in a few days. Exhausted and terrified, I barely slept. 3 nights later, everything escalated. I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of footsteps in my attic. Heavy ones, not the scurrying of an animal. These were slow, dragging steps. My breath caught in my throat. My attic didn't share a ceiling with Howard's home. He had no access to it. Whatever was up there was in my house. I grabbed a flashlight, climbed the attic ladder, and pushed the hatch open. The beam sliced through the darkness. Dust swirled in the air. At first, I saw nothing. Then I spotted it, long, deep scratch marks carved into the wooden beams. Fresh ones. Still splintered. Something had been up there. Recently. I backed down the ladder so quickly I nearly fell. I called the police, shaking, and 2 officers came by. They searched the attic, checked the vents, walked around the property. Nothing. But before leaving, one officer asked, "What's up with your neighbor?" "What do you mean?" He motioned toward Howard's house. "Guy's been standing in his driveway this whole time, just staring at your window." Sure enough, through my blinds, I could see Howard, motionless, eyes locked on my house. He wasn't blinking. The officers approached him, but Howard didn't seem to even notice. He only said, "It's coming for the one who heard it." They left after deciding he wasn't a threat, just mentally unwell. I wasn't convinced. The next evening, I heard a blood-curdling scream. It came from Howard's house. I rushed outside and banged on his door. No answer. The scream came again, raw, desperate. I tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, the house was dark, except for a faint orange glow coming from the basement. The air smelled damp, rotten, like soil and something coppery. "Howard," I called. No response. I took a deep breath and followed the glow down the basement stairs. The basement was filled with dozens of tall, narrow trenches dug into the concrete floor. Some were empty, most were not. I saw bags, those same black bags Howard had been carrying every morning, stacked neatly along one wall. The smell was overwhelming. I didn't want to know what was inside them. Howard was on his knees in the center of the room. His hands were covering his ears, shaking violently. "It's out," he whispered. "I can't hold it anymore." Before I could react, the lights flickered. Something moved in the corner. Not quickly, slowly, like it was stretching after being confined for too long. A long, skeletal hand slid out from behind the furnace. The fingers were impossibly thin, each ending in a pointed, dirty nail. The rest of it followed, tall, impossibly tall, bending its form to fit the room, it's touching the ceiling. Its skin was thin and gray, stretched over bone like wet paper. No eyes, just a gaping, vertical slit where a face should have been. Howard screamed, "Don't look at it!" But I already had. The creature tilted its head toward me. It scraped one long, nail-like finger along the floor. Tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. The same rhythm I'd heard through the wall. I ran. I don't even remember climbing the stairs. I stumbled out the door and into my house, locking everything behind me. From my living room window, I watched as the lights in Howard's house flickered violently. Then the screaming stopped. Silence. Police and ambulances came later, but Howard was never found. They eventually sealed off the house, claiming it was unsafe, structurally compromised. I moved out the next week. I barely packed anything. Months have passed since then, and I try to tell myself none of it was real, that I imagined it, that the sleepless nights twisted my senses. But last night, in my new apartment, I heard something through the vent. 3 slow scrapes, a pause, 4 quick ones, and then a whisper. Very faint, but unmistakable. It said my name. Story the end. It all began on a sweltering August evening in suburban Springfield, Illinois. I had just moved into my first house, a modest 2-story split level tucked into a quiet cul-de-sac. Across the street lived a man in his late 40s, plain-looking, always in faded t-shirts and jeans, with a small dog that followed him around the yard. His name, I later learned from the mailman, was Gary. At first he seemed harmless, the kind of neighbor who nodded politely but didn't linger for small talk. The first time I noticed something off was about a week after I moved in. I had just finished unloading boxes when I heard a low, rhythmic thumping coming from Gary's house late at night. At first, I thought it might be the HVAC system or a washing machine, but the sound was too uneven, too deliberate. It went on for hours, stopping abruptly, only to start again in the early morning. A few nights later, I was watering the front lawn when I saw him dragging something across his driveway. It was long, wrapped tightly in a tarp, the kind you'd buy at a hardware store. He moved slowly, methodically, as if it weighed a ton. My stomach twisted when I realized he was heading toward the small shed behind his house. He disappeared inside, and the sound of heavy thuds echoed briefly. I told myself it was probably nothing. People move furniture and yard equipment all the time. But the feeling in my gut told me otherwise. The real terror began when I noticed the smells. I tried to dismiss them at first, a mix of rot, iron, and something I couldn't quite identify, but they grew stronger over the weeks. Sometimes when I stepped outside in the evening, I would catch whiffs of it drifting across my lawn from his yard. It was faint, barely noticeable to anyone else, but unmistakable to me. One night, I couldn't sleep. Around 1 a.m., I peeked out my bedroom window and saw Gary carrying a large garbage bag toward the street. He paused under the streetlight, and I saw a dark liquid dripping from the bottom. My hands shook as I grabbed my phone to call the police, but he noticed me. His head turned slowly, and our eyes met for a moment. There was no emotion in his gaze. Nothing human. Just cold calculation. I froze. He carried the bag to a dumpster at the far end of the cul-de-sac and disappeared back inside. The police took the report, but said there was no immediate evidence of a crime. They suggested I keep an eye out, document anything unusual. Over the next few days, I started noticing patterns. Gary would leave the house at odd hours, sometimes carrying boxes, bags, or even furniture wrapped in blankets. He would always return quickly, and the noises from inside, scraping, dragging, thuds, continued. Then it happened. I was outside trimming the hedges when I heard a soft, almost human groan coming from the garage next door. At first, I thought it was the dog, but the sound was too deliberate, too strained. I stopped what I was doing and listened. There it was again, low and agonized, followed by a dragging sound across the garage floor. I froze, heart pounding. The next morning, I noticed something disturbing. The small dog that usually wandered the yard was nowhere to be seen. Gary's lawn was strangely quiet, and there were no lights on inside the house. I tried to shake it off, telling myself animals wander off all the time, but the feeling of dread wouldn't leave. A week later, the police returned with a search warrant. Someone had reported a suspicious odor coming from the house, and multiple neighbors had seen strange activity. When they forced the front door open, the sight inside was nightmarish. The basement was converted into a makeshift holding area. Cages lined the walls, each one containing an emaciated animal. But worse were the human-sized restraints, chains attached to the floor and walls, makeshift beds that had been stained and soaked. Gary was arrested without resistance. He never explained anything. His calm, detached demeanor remained unchanged as officers led him away. I later learned that Gary had been running a secret operation for years. Missing persons, people reported as gone, were often held in his basement before being moved elsewhere. The dog I had seen was the only pet he kept, and even it had been neglected almost to death. After he was taken away, the house was boarded up and the neighborhood tried to return to normal. But I couldn't shake the memories, the scraping, the groaning, the cold, lifeless stare he had given me that night under the streetlight. Even months later, when the wind shifts just right, I swear I can hear faint dragging noises coming from that house, now abandoned and silent. I moved not long after. I couldn't live next to that house anymore. But sometimes, driving past Maplewood Drive or walking past a quiet cul-de-sac, I feel the same knot of fear in my stomach, the same creeping sense that horror can exist right next door, hidden behind the facade of normalcy. Story the end. The night I moved into my townhouse in a quiet suburb outside Columbus, Ohio, the air smelled like fresh asphalt and pine. It was one of those newly developed neighborhoods with identical units lined up in neat rows, clean, modern, predictable. I loved it immediately. After a difficult breakup and a year of couch surfing, I finally had a place to call my own. The neighbors on either side seemed normal enough. On the left lived a young couple who kept to themselves. On the right lived an elderly man named Raymond. He introduced himself on my second day as I was bringing in groceries. He had a raspy voice, a warm smile, and a cane that clicked against the concrete as he walked. "You're the new one," he said, leaning on the railing. "Welcome. I'm right next door if you need anything." I thanked him. He seemed harmless, friendly even, the kind of neighbor who watered his plants and read books on the porch. But the first strange thing happened just 3 nights later. I was in the kitchen unpacking dishes when I heard a knock. Slow, deliberate. I opened the door expecting a package delivery, but no one was there. The only sign of life was Raymond's porch light flickering faintly in the warm night air. I shrugged it off. Kids playing pranks, I told myself. A new neighborhood always had them. But a few nights later, it happened again. This time the knock was softer, almost hesitant. When I opened the door, a small object sat on the welcome mat, a wooden bird figurine carved by hand, painted in fading blue. I picked it up, confused. There was no note, no explanation. The next morning, as I left for work, Raymond was outside tending to his garden. He looked up at me with the same warm smile. "Sleep well?" he asked. I hesitated. "Did you leave something at my door last night?" He blinked slowly. "I don't know what you mean, dear," he said, "but I'm glad you're settling in." The answer didn't quite sit right with me, but I didn't press. The figurine was odd, but maybe someone had dropped it accidentally. Maybe a child had left it, except it wasn't the last one. Every few nights, always after midnight, I heard a gentle knock at my door, and every time when I checked, a new wooden figure would be waiting. A fox, a small house, a carved feather. The craftsmanship was intricate, delicate, too beautiful to be random junk. I began to lose sleep. I started staying awake just to listen for the knocks. Some nights they didn't come. Other nights they came twice. Sometimes a shadow drifted beyond the frosted glass panel of the door. A tall figure, unmoving. Whenever I opened the door, the street was empty. Raymond's porch light was always on, flickering softly. One evening, I decided to ask him directly. "I've been finding things left at my door," I said gently. "Little wooden carvings. Are you sure you don't know anything about them?" Raymond paused. He stared at me with an expression I couldn't decode. Then, finally, he answered. "Sometimes the neighborhood has traditions," he said carefully. "You might be getting welcomed." "Welcomed by who?" He smiled, but there was something fragile behind it. Not everyone introduces themselves the usual way. It wasn't a real answer, and his tone carried something like warning, quiet, cautious, almost afraid. 2 nights later, the knocking grew louder, more urgent. I leapt from bed, heart pounding, and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the nightstand. I crept to the front door. The knocking continued. 3 slow knocks, a pause, then 3 more. I looked through the peephole. My stomach dropped. Someone was standing perfectly still facing my door, not moving, not swaying, just standing, a tall shape covered in a dark hooded jacket. I couldn't see their face. The porch light from Raymond's unit flickered, casting an eerie strobe across the figure. I backed away slowly. The knocking stopped. A moment later, I heard footsteps, slow, dragging footsteps, moving across my porch. Then descending the stairs, then silence. I didn't sleep at all. The next morning, exhaustion and panic pushed me to install a security camera. I placed one above the door, one in the hallway, one facing the back patio. That night, I stayed awake to monitor the feed. At around 2:17 a.m., the camera picked up movement. A tall figure approached my door, hoodie still hiding their face. They leaned toward the door, too close, and remained there for nearly 10 minutes. Not knocking, not moving, just pressing their head close to the door, as if listening. When they finally moved, they lifted something and placed it on the mat. Another carving, this one of a person, a small wooden figure with long hair carved in detail. Me. I nearly vomited. I marched straight to Raymond's door the next morning and knocked hard. When he answered, his face looked tired, drained, his eyes sunken. "Do you know who's doing this?" I demanded. "This isn't a tradition. This isn't welcoming. Someone is stalking me." Raymond's voice trembled when he spoke. "You should leave," he whispered. "You shouldn't have moved in. They don't like new people." My skin crawled. "Who?" He shook his head slowly. "Not everyone in this neighborhood is alive the way you think." It sounded insane, but his fear was real, more real than anything I'd seen. He reached behind his door and handed me a small brass key. "This is for the attic in your unit," he said. "You need to see what's up there." I stared at the key, breath stuck in my throat. "Why? What's in the attic?" He didn't answer. He closed the door. I tried calling the property manager. No answer. I emailed. No response. The couple on the left claimed they'd heard nothing unusual and seemed uncomfortable talking about it. The whole neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. Eventually, fear overcame hesitation. That night, with the brass key clenched in my hand, I pulled down the attic ladder and climbed up. The space was dark, dusty, and hot. I flicked my flashlight around, expecting boxes or old wiring. Instead, the beam froze on something that made my skin crawl. Carvings, hundreds of them, piled in corners, arranged in rows, stuffed into crates. Animals, houses, people, children, couples. A few that resembled the couple next door, a few that looked like Raymond. Many faces were detailed, too detailed. Near the center of the attic, arranged in a perfect circle, were several figures that looked almost identical. Same height, same posture, same shape of hair. They were unfinished. Rough faces, smoothed bodies without defined features. One of them wore a tiny carved necklace. My necklace. Behind me, the attic ladder creaked. Footsteps. Slow. Dragging. I turned off the flashlight and held my breath, listening. Someone climbed the ladder, step by agonizing step. I heard them reach the top, heard the faint rasp of their breathing, close, too close. I stayed pressed into the shadows, silent, praying they wouldn't see me. The figure shuffled forward, brushing against the carvings. I could barely make out their shape in the moonlight, filtering through the vent. They reached down, picked up one of the unfinished figures, and cradled it like a child. Then they whispered, voice cracked, hollow, almost ready. I didn't wait. I didn't breathe. I crawled across the attic silently, slipped to the ladder, and descended as slowly as I could. Once my feet hit the hallway, I ran. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, nothing else. I sprinted to the car and drove until sunrise. I never went back. Never retrieved my belongings, never asked questions. A week later, I learned the townhouse complex had been shut down. Structural issues, the news said. Resident complaints. The units were empty now, the development unfinished. Raymond disappeared. No obituary, no forwarding address. He simply vanished. I still move apartments every year. I still check my doors 3 times before bed. I still jump when I hear a knock at night. And sometimes I find small wooden carvings in places I know I didn't leave them. On a countertop, on a desk, in a drawer I rarely open. Always unfinished, always waiting. Story the end.